American AirChexx Magazine.
From the weekly worldwide syndication of American Top 40 to his regular voicing of numerous major national TV and radio spots, which everybody is jealous of, Casey Kasem owns one of the most familiar voices in the electronic media today. For some personal revelations by a very successful guy and my chief competition, here's the American AirChexx interview with Casey Kasem.
Everybody always seems to have an interesting story about early indications on that they were going to be in radio. Can you recall any childhood experiences that that were indicators?
It's a good question. I was just discussing this the other day. I forgot that Mrs. Wenzel could have started my career much sooner. And maybe in the back of my head, that's one of the reasons that I go out of my way to help people whenever I can. If somebody wants some help in voiceover, and there isn't a week that goes by that I don't get 2 or 3 calls. Somebody who wants to be an actor, or a voiceover specialist, or a disc jockey, and I do my best to help. But Mrs. Wenzel, when I was in the 7th grade, auditioned us at Hutchins Junior High School in Detroit, saying there's a radio station, an educational station, WDTR, looking for talented young people in their dramatic radio shows. And I always thought I had a flair for telling jokes as a kid, and I played Little Black Sambo in kindergarten and was very good, and that was my debut. And I won the school talent contest for doing a dramatic script in front of a microphone. And Mrs. Wendell says, you know, you and this girl are going to be going to this broadcast workshop at WDTR for the public schools. Well, 2 years went by and she never sent us. Oh. And it wasn't until I finished high school that I went to WDTR and started doing some things. I went and introduced myself and said I want to be in radio. And because I'd done sports announcing in high school, I created a whole sports show. But if she had started me in the 7th grade, I probably would have been doing work on the Lone Ranger show 5-6 years sooner. I probably would have gotten into theater much sooner. I would have become a serious actor much more earlier in my career. And I think that would have helped, because I absorb quickly, and I'm ambitious, and I came from a town where I think you had to be ambitious, and from a background that, my father was an immigrant. He came up through Mexico as a peddler, and worked in the railroads cleaning out the coal in the engines, and then opened up a little grocery store. I never could read or write English. So I guess I was shooting for a little bit more than other people.
In other words, it was kind of a poverty childhood.
Well, I lived in what you might call a lower middle class neighborhood, and but at the time I thought I was rich.
Right. What do you think, Casey? This is something that's been discussed an awful lot by a lot of people over conventions and so on. But there's something about people that go into radio that's unique. Seems to be a commonality. Do you agree with that?
Well, my entry into radio was as an actor, because I realized that's what I wanted to do. I could never identify as a disc jockey starting out in broadcasting, because I never really had any desire to be a disc jockey. I do remember listening to Jack the Bellboy at Mackenzie when I was a kid, working in a grocery store, and I said to myself one day, if I wanted to be a disc jockey, I think I could be a good one. I think I'd be the best. But I don't want to do that. I think I want to be a baseball player or an actor. This is while I was about 10th, 11th grade. But the ones who become disc jockeys because they really want to be disc jockeys, I envy. Because a Gary Owens, a Bob Hudson, some of the Charlie Tuna, these people who just love being on the radio and showcasing themselves. I think that's great. I think they've gotten what they really want. That has never been my desire. Radio was never the thing that I wanted the most. Acting has always been the thing that I've wanted for 25 years. But fortunately, when I did get into radio, I worked very, very hard to overcome the lack of talent that a Gary Owens, a Charlie Tuna, or Bob Hudson might have naturally. So I couldn't identify as a disc jockey, certainly as a broadcaster, but not as a disc jockey who wanted to do that.
What was the first station you worked for?
I worked for WJLB, and at the time it was 1954 when I got to the Army, and I'd already done, of course, network radio as an actor on the Lone Ranger, Green Hornet, and Sergeant Preston. But when I came back from the Army, I'd done some disc jockeying in Korea.
You did that before you went to...
In 1950, when I went to college at Wayne State.
While you were in college, you were doing acting?
Yes.
Can you remember some of the roles that you played?
Sure. I played Indians. I played on Bob Barkley. I remember the first part I played there was a little French boy. And then I would play heavies, young heavies. I could go anywhere from about 13 years old up to about 25. Had a nice voice range for that. And even today, I have a voice range that is about 16 up. I play Shaggy on Scooby-Doo, Where Are You? I do Robin on Batman and Robin and Super Friends.
You wouldn't mind doing just a little bit of that?
Oh, Shaggy, sure. Scooby, is that really a ghost coming at us? Oh, get me out of here! Quick! Run, Scoob, run! Scooby-Doo, where are you?
I want to continue with this history for a second and then get back to that. You came back and then you went to work at WJLB, and then what did you do at WJLB?
Right, at JLB, I was just a staff announcer. When I came back from the Army, I did a Lone Ranger show and asked one of the announcers, I said, I'd love to do a part-time job while I'm going to college and acting on the radio shows and maybe do a 2 or 3 day a week announce stint. I was in Korea and I did some of it there. And he said, well, go over to WJLB there. They're looking for a part-time announcer. And I did and went, and they gave me the NBC test, where you have to pronounce Grand Prix and so on and so on. And,
no, tell me about that. Don't get away.
Well, the old NBC announce test was loaded with words that you would mispronounce if you didn't really know the word. And I remember going to Wayne State. We all went through that in the first announce class. They gave you the NBC test, so you got through most of those words. So when I read it, I passed with flying colors, and I faked being an announcer because I was a good enough actor to do that. So I got the job and continued acting in theater. And the Lone Ranger by then had just beginning to die in 54 and 55. And I did summer stock with George C. Scott at Willoway Playhouse in Michigan, and did about 5 plays with him. And then I graduated college and left my job in radio as the #1 disc jockey at JLB, not JLB, JBK by then.
So you continued as a disc jockey for...
Till 1957, and then I left. And I had some work to do with my family's... my mother had a supermarket, and it wasn't doing too well, so I went up there for a year and straightened that out. And then I went to New York as an actor in 58. And I was there for about 5 months. I was living on $40 a week. And so I had a choice to make right there. I said, well, I think I'm going to leave here and promise myself I'll be back in New York or in Hollywood in 3 years. And I'll be able to sustain myself as a disc jockey and then pursue my goal as an actor. Well, while I was doing the disc jockey thing, I ultimately went to San Francisco in 60 and then came down to Los Angeles with Cleveland in between, or before that. And I've been very lucky. I did well in Los Angeles, had a television show, and was very active in dances and things like that. So I did well financially. And
you were working on the radio in L.A.?
Yeah, at KRLA.
At KRLA.
This is during the Beatles years, in 63 to 68.
Yeah, you mentioned a while ago about KEWB and...
Right, and Chuck Blower. I was in Cleveland after I left New York in 58. 59 I went to Cleveland and did a Casey at the Mic show there. Then went to Buffalo for a short stint and was fired for insubordination after 3 months and was really insubordinate.
Why were you insubordinate?
Well, Steve Lebunski was operating MCA out of New York and doing very well. They were #1 in New York at the time, I believe it was MCA. And they owned BNY and Schwartz Broadcasting, I think, owned BNY in Buffalo. And I went there and from Cleveland, and with the understanding, I thought, that I could play my own music. Art Roberts was there then. I was there. Lucky Pierre was there, and I forget a couple of the other guys.
Okay.
After a couple of months, I could see that they were going to program it out of New York. And in those days, records still meant something. If a disc jockey went on the air and he sounded as though he had listened to records all day long, and he just picked the cream of the crop and by God brought him in there to play the things that he felt were going to happen and was on top of music. For instance, in Cleveland and Buffalo, I had a ding-a-ling tune of the day, I had a sleeper of the night, I had a Mickey Mouse tune of the night, I had a payola record of the night, and used to do a feature talking to Slick Al in New York on how much I was going to make on that song. And we'd argue about the money. And I said, okay, I'll play it. I mean, this is before the payola thing busted wide open in Cleveland, and Joe Fine and Wes Hopkins made banner headlines and sued KYA for $2.5 million. Do you know the station wouldn't let me stop doing it? Because they said, if you stop it, they'll think you were taking payola.
Yeah.
Anyway, so I said, well, you can't operate, this is back in Buffalo now, you can't operate a radio station by programming it out of New York. And so I went on the air one night and didn't do Wild Tracks. And I had said that I would. Well, anyway, we got into arbitration, and I lost hands down. As a matter of fact, I just read. We just moved, and I was just going through my old papers, and I never read it. I was so disappointed when I lost. I just read it. And page after page saying how, what a bad employee I was. I'll say this. When I look back on it now, I probably was a bad employee. After all, they were paying me to do a job, and if I didn't like it, I could leave.
Right.
There are all kinds of other things that enter into it, but as I look back on it now, I'm glad I did what I did because I felt it was for principle. But on the other hand, at that time, they were more right than I was.
Where'd you go from KRLA? What happened?
KRLA, I realized that in '68, I asked John Barrett if I could go part-time. And he said, well, don't go right now. He says, wait a while. I said, well, I really want to act now, John. I've just co-produced a movie with Dennis Hopper called Glory Stompers, and I co-starred in that and a couple other things that were underway. I says, now's my time to make the acting move. And I started doing commercials at that time, too, and I had some national commercials.
You hadn't been doing a lot?
Never done any prior to that. In '68 is when I started. So when I went part-time, I didn't really want to do part-time locally. I had an idea for a national show that I'd always had in the back of my head since 1949. I said if I was going to be a disc jockey, I wanted to be the best, and I wanted to work one day a week and let everybody hear me. I always thought if I were going to do a show, I'd want to do a national show once a week and take the top records and play them. And I called Ron Jacobs in 1958, and I said, Ron, I've got a 68. I said, got a great idea for a show. Or 69, I guess it was. He said, what? I said, well, I think we could count down the Billboard Top 40, and then my little bits that I do, my teaser bio things that I do on KRLA. He says, don't say any more. He says, when can you come over? I said, right now. He says, great, come on over here and let's do it. And that's how quick he grabbed the idea.
Huh.
And then, of course, Tom Rounds and my partner, Don Bastani, and Ron Jacobs, and all of us, with the help of a very good backer, Tom Driscoll, we got the thing and we were on, I guess, within 3-4 months, 5 months.
How many stations do they have now?
Started with 6, and now we can, I guess by the time this is broadcast, I'd guess we'll probably be close to 400.
Okay.
Yeah.
How do you explain the success of that show, Casey?
Well, I think we came in at a time when nobody liked the word Top 40. But I always felt that with radio, with 70 radio stations in Los Angeles or more, and with the number of radio stations growing and the number of people growing, there was always room for a specific type format. And Americans had grown up and been fed a way of broadcasting that said, this is what you're going to hear, and this is the time you're going to hear it. And there was order. Of course, during the Vietnam War, there was no order. We shattered the order. It was a good thing. What was happening internationally was being reflected, I believe, first in broadcasting and in music. And so order was coming back, and I could see that. And in 1970, I could see people wanted to settle down. People also want to know what's going to happen, and they want to know that it's clean and clear and there's no rubble in front of them. And I believe that's what American Top 40 is. I think the other thing that's important was that our approach to Top 40, my whole approach to broadcasting was always a show business approach, was always entertain, inform, respect your audience, never talk down to your audience, give them 100% of yourself. Don't put a door between you and the person talking to you or listening to you. And so I believe what I brought to the show was the idea that it should be simple, that the teaser bio idea would entertain and inform at the same time, and a seriousness that said what we're doing isn't the most important thing in the world. But because we're taking up 3 hours of space across the country and around the world, we want to be serious enough to give you your money's worth. Now, the way I began doing American Top 40, I owe to a general manager named John McCrae up in San Francisco at KEWB. He had fired Don Bowman and Don McKinnon, who were Wild Trackers. He had asked me to switch format. He came in, he says, we're not going to do Wild Tracks on our station anymore. I said, John, I said, I don't understand. He said, well, I just don't want you to do them anymore. I said, you mean just stop? Now, mind you, I'd been fired in Buffalo for insubordination, right? I said, well, this time I think maybe I better listen. My next step is Hollywood, so I'll cool it. I said, what do you want me to do, John? I said, I'm number one, right? He says, yep, you're the number one disc jockey, and you beat KYA. And I'm the only disc jockey beating them. Big numbers I had. And I said, I'm doing this Little Girl Without a Name and Happy and this wild track show, and it's funny, and then we do the quiet hour where I just talk to people. He said, no, he said, we're just going to eliminate all the wild tracks. I said, what do you want me to do? He said, why don't you do like they did in the 40s? And just talk about, know the artists, know the music. I said, gee, I don't know anything about music. I really didn't. I mean, I want to be an actor. So I said, okay.
But this was a key to what you're doing right now.
And I think that if I hadn't been fired for insubordination in Buffalo, I would have told John McCrae, John, I'm the number one disc jockey. I'm going across the street. I'm going to continue doing what it is that I'm doing that's getting me the numbers. But I was smart enough to listen to the general manager, a guy who seemed to know what he wanted. And and God, I think, was looking over my shoulder and said, we'll help you out a little bit.
It looks to me, as I look through your bio, that God was looking over your shoulder an awful lot.
Can I say something along that respect?
Sure.
And I mean this sincerely. Every now and then we all go through downer periods. But I believe that for every ounce of energy that you give toward helping somebody, toward making somebody else's life a little bit more comfortable in any way, I think you get paid back 10 times. And I've never seen it fail. I think it's a philosophy of life, and I believe these kind of people attract positive people. Positive people usually want to help other positive people, and that's what's happened in my career.
Yeah.
I've got a long way to go as an actor, but I don't like to I don't ever want to get to the point where I'd like to move ahead in giant steps by stepping over people who really belong ahead of me.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Bob.
Thank you, Casey. We'd also like to thank Watermark for allowing us the use of one of their studios to record the interview in.